Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. A link to the full text of this ritual is included in the description below. The most explicitly solar ritual in Thelema is Liber Resh vel Helios sub figura 200, or the Book of Resh, or the Sun under the number 200. The Hebrew letter Resh is assigned to the tarot card the Sun, the Hebrew word Resh itself meaning sun. The number 200 is the value of this letter, and so this is also the number of the book. Usually Thelemites refer to this ritual simply as Resh for convenience, and the following discussion will follow this convention. The Egyptian style of the ritual is immediately obvious. There is actually a real Egyptian precedent for this type of prayer. Located on the Giza Plateau, there are the remains of a series of sun temples. Built during the 5th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, these square-shaped complexes feature an open central courtyard, within which is a 36-meter-tall obelisk. Before this obelisk, which was an eidolon of the sun and its light, with obvious phallic associations, was an altar for offerings. These seem to have been made in conjunction with the worship of the sun under 3 aspects. At dawn, the sun was worshipped as Kefra, at noon as Re, and at sunset as Atum. This is very similar to the form of Resh. Also, like this Egyptian practice, Resh is intended to tap into the awareness of the sun's spiritual symbolism and energy as manifested both physically and imaginally in its daily phases of appearance. The other major influence on the structure of the ritual is the Islamic daily prayer, or a salat. This is obligatory for all Muslims as one of the 5 pillars of faith and involves facing towards the Kaaba at Mecca and engaging in various devotional prostrations and recitations of the Quran. Crowley had been taught how to perform this prayer in his travels and must have seen its powerful effects in unifying a community through a common ritual of divine aspiration and devotion. Resh is the Thelemic equivalent of Salat and is intended to make an individual increasingly mindful of their aspiration to the great work through a ritual break in the pattern of daily activity, to reaffirm their spiritual unity and alignment with the source of light and life in our world. Or, as Crowley puts it succinctly in the text of the ritual itself, quote, "Thus shalt thou ever be mindful of the great work which thou hast undertaken to perform, and thus shalt thou be strengthened to pursue it unto the attainment of the stone of the wise, the summum bonum, true wisdom, and perfect happiness," unquote. The ritual text begins by stating, "These are the adorations to be performed by aspirants to the AA." The AA referred to here is by no means only this organized structure created by Crowley and George Cecil Jones in 1909. The key words are aspirants to the AA, which is intended to apply equally to those already initiated or linked to a formal AA lineage, as well as to those who are not. The AA referred to here is ultimately none other than the so-called third order in and of itself, the state of being of realization of identity with the divine reality, that is to say, enlightenment. Therefore, this is intended to be a ritual for all Thelemites to perform, if it be their will to do so, and not just formal AA initiates. The ritual is said to be an adoration. This means that it is intended to be as much an exercise in devotion and intuitive understanding as intellectual comprehension of the correspondences and symbols involved. 4 different directions are faced during the ritual, in a system that derives originally from Freemasonry. At dawn, one should face east because this is where the sun rises. In other words, one should face and look at the sun. The same basic rule applies for the other directions. West is faced at sunset because this is where the sun sets. In the northern hemisphere, noon and midnight are the times when the sun is at, respectively, the most southern and northernmost points of its movement through the celestial sphere, so the ritual is directed accordingly. Additionally, the south is also the direction of the element of fire and the direction of the source of the Nile River. North is also described in the neophyte initiation of the Golden Dawn as the place of the greatest symbolical darkness. The method of dividing space into 4 directions in Resh also carries with it the various connotations. of its symbolism in, for example, the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, and other banishing rituals. The ritual calls for one to give the sign of one's grade. In its most direct interpretation, this means to give the sign of one's AA grade if one has one. If one does not have one, or if one is performing the ritual publicly and one does not wish to disclose this private information, there are several oral traditions of how to address this. One tradition is to give the most general AA signs of Horus and Harpocrates. One would make the sign of the Emperor or Horus towards the sun while hailing it, signifying one's exchange of spiritual, imaginal, and physical energy with it. This sign is then naturally followed by the sign of silence, as described in section 5 of the ritual text, signifying the acknowledgement of the sealing of the current of force. There's a second tradition which calls for the aspirant to give the sign of Set fighting. This sign gives a sense of hailing the sun, as described in the vocalized portion of the text. Also, it is a sign of the Malkut grade of Neophyte in the AA, the first full grade in that order, and therefore usable as a kind of general AA sign. There's a third tradition which bases itself upon a notation by Crowley in his personal copy of the Equinox. This reads, "Where the aspirant has no grade, let him give the LVX signs at dawn, 4 equals 7 at noon, 2 equals 9 at sunset, 3 equals 8 at midnight." This alignment places the magician at the intersection of Somic and Pe, a key point of equilibrium on the tree of life for the outer college of the AA, and the same position used in the pentagram ritual. There is a tradition originating from Los Angeles, this probably derives from Jim Eshelman, that at dawn resh one can alternatively give the full analysis of the keyword or simply the sign of Osiris slain. To make this sign, the arms are held out straight to the sides and the feet are placed together, making the body into a cross shape. This sign is intended to be a stand-in for the whole sequence of the Lux signs, as well as to be like a hawk with its wings outstretched, thereby identifying oneself further with Re as Re Horus or Rahor Kuit. In a letter to Hymenaeus Alpha 777, grading Mercury, Crowley also indicated that OTO degree signs could be used at this point in Resh. Crowley wrote, "Use at start signs of grades 0 to 3rd degree OTO and sign of Emperor followed by sign of silence at the hail." Unquote. Obviously, these signs should not be used in public, one of the previous options being substituted in this circumstance. There are 4 god forms used in this ritual, representing 4 aspects of the sun in its journey. The 4 gods are Re, Tum or Atum, Ahathor or Hathor, and Kefra. 2 of these deities are male, 1 is female, and Kefra is ambiguous with regards to its gender. Kefra is male in the original Egyptian material, but it should be noted that the actual scarab beetle that rolls its ball of dung within which to plant its eggs is biologically female. Re is one of the most important, ancient, and supreme gods of Egypt. He represents the sun as well as the rulership of the divine reality over the entire universe. So pervasive is this identification by the Egyptians of the supreme spirit with the sun that the other deities of the Egyptian pantheon were often understood as being aspects of Re. This was shown by combining their names with that of Re, for example, Amun-Re, and so forth. Re was understood imaginally as traveling over the heavens in a great barge or boat. Crowley calls it a bark in Liber Resh. This is the boat called Millions of Years, that is to say, eternity. In it are the whole company of gods, of which Tahuti and Rahor, that is, Re himself, are singled out for mention in the ritual. Every day this boat passes over the heavens during the day and then through the underworld at night, only to be reborn again at dawn. This is symbolic of the continual veiling and unveiling of the divine reality by itself through the process of the phenomenon of reality. Through the practice of Resh, we bring ourselves to an awareness of this continual process. The most common representation of Re in Egyptian art is as combined with Horus. This is Re Harakti, or Ra Horus of the 2 horizons. In the Book of the Law, this is the deity Rahor Kuit. At noon, the solar reality is revealed in its aspect as Hathor, the cow-headed goddess of fertility and fecundity. In her harsh aspect, Hathor becomes Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess representing the burning fire of the sun's rays. Hathor means house of Horus in Egyptian, and she is seen as mother of the god-king, the pharaoh. Many statues exist of Hathor in her cow form, with the pharaoh suckling her for milk. Hathor ultimately is the goddess as such, manifesting as the sun in its highest elevation and power. At sunset, the sun is addressed in its aspect as Atum, a creator god shown iconographically as a bearded man. Spontaneously emerging of his own creation from the primordial waters of chaos, Atum then generated the other gods in the world of men and women from his blood and or semen by either cutting his phallus or masturbating. The joy of Atum referred to in the ritual is probably a reference to this act of symbolic self-sacrifice whereby the universe came into being. This act is a kind of death, for in creating particular existence, the universal existence is occulted and hidden. Therefore, this is a moment of the setting of the sun, of the source of light and life. There remains, however, the potential of the particular existence to recognize the source of its creation, to reawaken to the eternal presence of that which has always already been the case. It is this golden dawn of remembrance which is the goal of magic. For there to be an unveiling, there must first also be a veiling, however, and in this there is also, therefore, joy. This is acknowledged in the practice of Resh. The sun at midnight is symbolized by the scarab beetle Kephra. This is the dung beetle who rolls a ball of dung, often several times its own size, across the ground and plants its eggs within it. From this ball then emerges a new beetle, seemingly spontaneously generated of its own power. This humble insect is shown in Egyptian art as carrying the sun through the underworld at night, the seed of a new dawn. Likewise, in our own night of ordeal and ignorance, we carry hidden the seed of our own enlightenment, to which we gather substance through our work upon ourselves, through our practice. Eventually, from the egg of potential bursts a new awareness. The name Kephra comes from the Egyptian verb kepher, which means to become. The proper means of magically interacting with these deities is described in point 6 of the ritual, which reads, "Also, it is better if in these adorations thou assume the God form of whom thou adorest, as if thou didst unite with him in the adoration of that which is beyond him." This means to visualize oneself as the deity in question and to identify one's own magical reality with the reality of that God. This makes explicit that the course of the sun's path and its experiences are none other than one's own. Also, there is a reference here to the sun behind the sun, that which is beyond him, the sun itself or God form. This means an acknowledgement that behind the physical sun and the particular yet sporadic imagery used for the God form and its myths lies the deeper reality of Bria and Atziluth, whose illumination is the goal of this ritual. The 5th point of the ritual reads, "And after each of these invocations thou shalt give the sign of silence, and afterwards thou shalt perform the adoration that is taught thee by thy superior, and then do thou compose thyself to holy meditation." Thy superior is intended to be one's AA initiator, if one has one. Ultimately, however, one's true superior is the holy guardian angel. Therefore, if one does not have an AA initiator through either circumstance or choice, then this passage can be understood to mean that one should perform whatever additional adorations or actions seem appropriate based upon one's magical experience. There are several oral traditions that can guide one in this choice. From the Sor Estai, or Jane Wolfe lineage of AA, comes the instructions that Crowley gave to Jane Wolfe at Sheffilu's Abbey of Thelema. These involve an implied interpretation of the Book of the Law, chapter 3, verse 38, which can be read as identifying the adorations as the portions of Crowley's poetic paraphrase of the lines of text on the Stelae of Revealing, which appear in the Book of the Law itself. The adorations are given in the attitude of the Lux signs of Osiris risen, while the following is said: "Unity uttermost showed, I adore the might of thy breath, supreme and terrible God, who makest the gods and death to tremble before thee. I adore thee. Appear on the throne of Re, open the ways of the Ku, lighten the ways of the Ka, the ways of the Kabs run through to stir me or still me. Aum, let it fill me. The light is mine, its rays consume me. I have made a secret door to the house of Ra and Tum, of Kephra and of Ahathor. I am my Theban omen to the prophet Onkof Nakonsu. By best amount my breast I beat, by wise Tanek I weave my spell. Show thy star splendor, O Nuit. Bid me within thine house to dwell, O winged snake of light Hadit. Abide with me, Rahor Kuit. There's a variant of this which comes out of the 1970s Berkeley OTO. This involves reciting the entirety of the Book of the Law, chapter 3, verses 37 to 38, inclusive of the non-verse text that occurs at the end of verse 37. Refer to the Book of the Law for this indication. These adorations are free poetical paraphrases written by Crowley in 1904 of the hieroglyphic passages upon the Stele of Revealing. Crowley was instructed to include these passages in the Book of the Law during its dictation through intuitive indication. The stele itself contains partial versions of several spells from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Crowley's poetical interpretation takes significant artistic license with the stele text, and while it follows the general gist of the hieroglyphs, it is perhaps best approached as its own text. The portion most commonly used in Resh begins, this is the first stanza, Unity uttermost showed, I adore the might of thy breath, supreme and terrible God, who makest the gods and death to tremble before thee. I adore thee. This is a general acknowledgement of Atziluth. The spirit of its presence or breath is said to be supreme and terrible, to make death itself tremble before it, because the supreme reality of the Kabbalistic zero can never be destroyed or cease to be. Nothingness cannot cease to exist. Death is itself part of this not that is also the true unity, a necessary phase of its unfolding of itself, its self-negation. This is the reality described in the adoration to the Lord of the universe in the rites of the Golden Dawn. Holy art thou, Lord of the universe. Holy art thou whom nature hath not formed. Holy art thou, the vast and the mighty one, Lord of the light and of the darkness. The second stanza of the adorations continues. Appear on the throne of Re. Open the ways of the Ku. Lighten the ways of the Ka. The ways of the Kabs run through to stir me or still me. Aum, let it fill me. This is an invocation inviting the divine reality to appear on the throne of Re, and for the Briatic spirit of the Absolute to indwell and manifest itself through the Yetziratic God forms, as well as through the signification of the physical sun and its light. This acts to empower the various sheaths of the subtle body, filling them with Gnostic light and energy. The third stanza of the adoration reads, The light is mine, its rays consume me. I have made a secret door into the house of Ra and Tum, of Kephra and of Ahathor. I am thy Theban omen to the prophet Onkof Nakonsu. This stanza takes the previous invocation further. One now identifies oneself with the spiritual light. It is mine and consumes me. The light is not an outside object being experienced as separate from the self, but is none other than one's real self. This gnosis consumes and absorbs the limited sense of self, freeing it of its limitations of false perspective towards itself. One's magical connection with the four phases of the sun is affirmed. The practice of Resh itself can be seen as the making of these secret doors. They give access to the house of the gods involved, that is to say, to the mode of illuminated consciousness they each embody. The final two lines of the stanza require some explanation. Onkof Nakonsu is the Theban priest whose funerary monument is the Stele Revealing. Mentu is a falcon-headed god, very similar to Horus. Crowley felt a strong magical identification with this priest, sometimes using his name as one of his magical mottos. There is an oral tradition of post-Crowley origin of substituting one's own magical motto in the adorations in place of Onkof Nakonsu's name. This works very well, and I recommend trying it. There are other changes which could be made. One could, for example, change the line to read, I am thy initiate, O Heru, the prophet, one's own motto. It is also certainly fine to use Ankh-After-Khonsu's name in the adorations instead of one's own motto, as he serves as a kind of stand-in for any aspirant. It is also customary for groups of Thelemites when saying Resh together to use the original form of this stanza so that everyone is saying the same thing. The fourth stanza of the adoration reads, By best amount my breast I beat, by wise Thelemic I weave my spell, show thy star splendor, O Nuit, bid me within thine house to dwell, O winged snake of light Hadid, abide with me, Rahor Kuit. Best Amount and Thelemic are Egyptian proper names and seem to refer in the stele text to Ankh-After-Khonsu's parents. It is customary in the aforementioned oral traditions to substitute the names of one's spiritual preceptors and teachers in place of these names as one's magical parents. This can be a very personal matter and may be appropriate to only use these names in private performances of Resh. In public performance, the original names of Best Amount and Thelemic would be used, but do what thou wilt. The adorations end with a direct invocation of the Thelemic theogony of Nuit, Hadid, and Rahor Kuit. Love is the law, love under will.